Alien Beast Woman Gladiator says I'm her victory prize and carries me around like one. Welcome to the world of science fiction. Comment below where in the world you are watching from today, and if you like this story, don't forget to subscribe. The twin suns beat down on the arena sands like a judgment. Oliver wiped his brow with the back of his oil-stained glove, squinting through the rising dust as the crowd roared from all sides. He stood on the technician's scaffold overlooking the blood-slicked center ring, supposedly just another low-ranked engineer assigned to maintain the kinetic barriers, but his attention wasn't on the wiring this time. It was locked onto her, Nyla. Towering, rust-furred, all muscle and fury, she moved like war personified, dodging a plasma pike with a savage twist of her hips before slamming her opponent into the cracked earth with a roar that echoed through Oliver's ribs. She was the star of the cars and pits, the undefeated beastwoman gladiator that fighters feared and fans adored, but for Oliver it wasn't fear or awe that burned in his chest. It was something far more dangerous: curiosity. The match ended with a brutal finale. Nyla stepped over the unconscious brute she had just pummeled, raising both clawed hands as the arena lights shimmered against her cracked war paint and blood-splattered leather straps. The crowd erupted, chanting her name like she was some ancient god awakened from myth. Oliver should have been returning to his station, checking the charge conduits or syncing the drone cams for replay, but he couldn't look away, not until she looked up, directly at him. For a split second their eyes locked across the chaos. Her orange gaze was sharp, intelligent, and unexpectedly focused. Oliver blinked, half convinced he was imagining things. Then Nyla took a step toward the edge of the ring. The announcer's voice boomed overhead in 3 languages, declaring her the victor of the Cycles Championship, offering the traditional spoils, weapon upgrades, arena credits, and the chance to claim a prize of her choosing from the victory roster. That's when it happened. Nyla didn't pick any of the lavish rewards or slaves or elite sparring contracts. Instead, she raised a clawed finger and pointed directly at him. Oliver, the technician with grease on his face and a faulty energy coupler in his tool belt. "I want the human," she growled, voiced deep and primal, picked up by the amphitheater's booming translation relay, the one with the quiet fire in his eyes. The crowd gasped and then exploded into laughter, cheers, and disbelief. Oliver stood frozen, his brain catching up with his body a second too late. Before he could react, she leapt effortlessly onto the scaffold in a single bounding motion, her presence overwhelming, the scent of sweat, blood, and desert wind clinging to her like an aura. He backed up instinctively, heart hammering, but she moved fast, faster than a being that size had any right to. One massive arm swept around his waist, lifting him clean off the platform as easily as if he were a sack of grain. "Hey, wait! I'm not on the roster," he began, struggling in surprise, but her grip was firm and not unkind. "Too bad. You're coming home with me," she purred, slinging him over her shoulder like a trophy, her voice a warm rasp against his back. "You looked at me like you saw more than claws. I like that." Oliver hung there, dazed, arms pinned, staring upside down at 1,000 aliens jeering and laughing, some cheering, others whistling. His mind raced, trying to process what had just happened. He hadn't signed up for this. He was supposed to finish his contract in 3 cycles, keep his head down, and maybe, if he was lucky, by passage back to the inner colonies. Instead, he was being carried through the flame-ringed archway into the private quarters of the most fearsome warrior on Karzen. Security didn't stop her. No one did. In fact, they opened the gates for her, offering respectful bows and stepping aside as she passed. Apparently, being the champion of the pit meant no one questioned your choices, even if that choice was a stunned human tech. She didn't speak as they moved through the narrow stone tunnels beneath the arena, only tightened her grip when he squirmed. Her den, if it could be called that, was carved into the rock wall itself. Sparse lighting flickered over a space filled with scavenged weapon racks, animal hides, broken banners, and a central fire pit. She set him down at last slowly, like she was offering a gift to the gods, and studied him with unreadable eyes. Oliver straightened his shirt, heart pounding, hands twitching slightly. "What the hell was that?" he demanded, trying not to sound panicked. You can't just grab someone like that. I'm not part of the prize pool." "You are now," Neela said, crouching beside the fire and tossing kindling into the coals. Her tone was casual, as though this whole situation made perfect sense. "You looked hungry, and you didn't flinch when I roared. That says something." "That I'm too tired to be scared," he muttered, packing back a step. "This is insane." She tilted her head, considering him. "Maybe, but you didn't say no. Not really." Oliver opened his mouth to argue, then stopped. It was true he hadn't protested the way he probably should have. There was something about her presence, something magnetic. Dangerous, yes, but not cruel. And when she looked at him, it wasn't as a possession. It was like she was weighing him, measuring more than his size or strength. It felt personal. Neela tossed him a strip of dried meat. He caught it on reflex. "You've got hands that know how to build," she said simply. "I don't. Everything in here is cracked or rusted. You fix things I feed you, you stay warm. You don't have to fight or bow. Fair trade." Oliver stared at the strip in his hand, then slowly looked around the chamber again. There was no bed, only furs, no chains, only scattered tools and battered armor, and yet something in her tone, gruff and oddly hopeful, made it feel less like a command and more like an offer. He exhaled slowly and sat down near the fire. "One night," he said. "I stay one night. After that we figure out what this is." Neela grinned, baring sharp teeth that should have been terrifying but weren't. "Good," she said. "Then I'll cook you something that actually tastes like food. Don't die on me, little fire. I like your eyes." And for the first time in months, Oliver didn't feel like just another cog in a machine. The fire crackled softly as the scent of spiced meat drifted through the den, mixing with the dusty tang of stone and Neela's wild musk. Oliver sat cross-legged on a rolled pelt that had definitely seen better days, the tough sinew of the cooked animal jerky still working between his teeth. It wasn't the worst meal he'd had since crashing on this sun-scorched planet, but it wasn't exactly fine dining either. Still, considering he was technically someone, victory prize, it was surprisingly civil. Neela, sitting across from him with her arms resting on her knees, didn't speak much as she ate. She simply watched him with those sharp orange eyes, the firelight flickering in their depths, like she was constantly trying to decode him. Her war paint had flaked slightly from sweat and blood, revealing faint scars beneath her fur. She didn't hide them, didn't even seem aware of them. To her, they were just part of her skin, same as her fangs or claws. Oliver tried to focus on the meal, but his brain was still tumbling through everything that had happened. He should have been terrified, should have been plotting an escape, or at least pushing harder on getting clarification. But there was something about the absurd calm between them that kept him grounded, something in the way Neela's presence filled the space without choking it. She wasn't treating him like an object or a pet. If anything, she was giving him space, letting him sit and eat, letting him exist in her world without expectation. That alone unsettled him more than any threat. So he finally said, breaking the silence, "You kidnap guys often, or am I special?" Neela huffed something that was almost a laugh, tearing into another strip of meat with a fang-filled grin. "Only the ones who stare like they're not afraid to get eaten," she said, licking her fingers clean with slow precision. "You didn't cower, you didn't flinch, you stood there like I was a person. That makes you rare here." He snorted, leaning back on one elbow. "I thought you just liked how I looked in grease-stained overalls." "Maybe I do," she replied without hesitation, tilting her head slightly. "But I can get bodies. What I wanted was something different." Oliver stared at her. "So what do you think I am? A pet project? A curiosity?" She looked at the flames for a long moment, and when she spoke, her voice was quieter. "Maybe I wanted someone who wouldn't just look at me like a weapon, someone who doesn't speak with fake respect because I can break their bones. You think I'm beautiful, don't you?" Oliver blinked, caught off guard. She wasn't being arrogant. There was no smugness, no teasing edge, just a raw, direct question like she genuinely didn't know the answer and wanted to. He hesitated, then nodded slowly. Yeah, I do. You look like fire and fury stitched into a body. That scares people, but that doesn't make it any less breathtaking. Neela's ears twitched. She didn't smile, but her expression softened in a way he hadn't seen before. She leaned forward, elbows on her thighs. No one said that before. They bow, they flee, they worship, or they curse, but they don't see me. Not really. Oliver looked down at his food. Well, then they're idiots. She chuckled softly. Maybe, or maybe they were just never meant to stay. They sat in companionable silence again, the kind of silence that didn't press. Eventually, Oliver stood and wandered the chamber, inspecting the crude living space. The place was functional, but clearly thrown together over years. Everything had been earned or taken by force. Her armor was stacked in a corner beside weapons made from at least 5 different civilizations. The lights flickered from damaged wiring, patched with copper strips and old fusion clamps. There were ventilation fans humming unevenly, likely half-fried from years in the dust. "You really live like this?" he asked, crouching near a corroded power relay. "It's mine," Neela said simply. "Every dent, every scorch mark I bled for this space. It's ugly, but it's mine. I can fix some of this. The power conduits are half-fried. That fan's going to die in a week. You've got good salvage, but no insulation. I could rig a battery grid, give you smoother output." She grinned again. "You offering to nest here?" He rolled his eyes, smiling in spite of himself. "I'm offering to stop this place from electrocuting you while you sleep." Her expression softened even more. "Then do it. I'll get you tools, and if you need wires, tell me what to rip out of the arena." "You're serious." "I'm always serious," she said, then added after a beat, "Unless I'm joking, you'll figure out which is which soon." Oliver shook his head and set to work. It felt strange, grounding wires and fixing terminals in the den of a gladiator who had only hours earlier tossed him over her shoulder like a bag of loot. But it also felt right. Like he wasn't just fixing circuits, he was building something more stable between them, something that hummed under the surface with potential. As he worked, Neela busied herself cleaning weapons, sometimes watching him from the corner of her eye. The silence returned, filled with purpose instead of tension. He asked for tools, and she handed them over without question. He made suggestions, and she considered them. No power struggle, no posturing, just 2 people figuring out how to share a space. Eventually, after the lights brightened and the heat in the room evened out, she came over and stood beside him. "You're fast. Thought humans were soft." "We're soft," he said, brushing his hands off on his pants. "Doesn't mean we're useless." She looked down at him. "You don't talk like prey. I like that." Oliver looked up, meeting her gaze. "You don't treat me like a trophy? I like that." Something shifted in her eyes. She reached out, slow and deliberate, and brushed a bit of grease from his jaw with one clawed finger. "I could have picked 100 others today. I picked you because you didn't look away. And I didn't fight you off." "Exactly." The air between them tightened, not with danger, but with unspoken energy. Something was building. Something they both felt but weren't quite ready to name. Nyla stepped back before the moment could catch fire. "Tomorrow you help me fix the water intake. The pump's been choking for weeks." "Fair," Oliver said, still feeling the ghost of her touch on his cheek. She turned away, her tail flicking once. "Sleep, little fire. You've got claws. I'll see if you have backbone." He watched her disappear behind a hanging curtain of tattered banners, the rustle of fur and armor fatting into stillness. And as he lay back beside the warm hum of the newly repaired generator, staring at the ceiling, he realized something that should have scared him more than it did. He wasn't planning to leave. Oliver awoke to the hum of old machinery and the faint aroma of heated mineral water drifting through the den. The generator he'd repaired the night before hummed steadily in the corner, its vibrations subtly radiating through the rock floor beneath the thick furs he'd slept on. His back ached, but it was a good ache, the kind that came from useful labor, not exhaustion. For a moment he forgot where he was. Then he heard the rhythmic thump of weighty footsteps and the soft clinking of metal against leather, and memories snapped back like a taut cable. He was still in Nyla's den, still technically her victory prize, and judging by the way the low growl of her voice rumbled through the stone wall, she was up and ready for another fight or breakfast. He stood and stretched, joints cracking, and ducked through the curtains separating the sleeping area from the main chamber. Nyla stood near the fire pit, crouched over what looked like the battered remains of a water purification pump. She had the housing cracked open, a wrench in one clawed hand, and a look of pure frustration etched across her features. A small pile of discarded filters lay nearby, soaked and corroded, clearly beyond saving. Her fur bristled slightly as she glanced back at him, irritation melting into a hint of amusement. "You sleep like you don't expect to wake up," she said, tossing the wrench aside with a clank. "That's either brave or stupid." Oliver rubbed the sleep from his face. "Depends on who I'm sleeping next to." Nyla's grin was sharp. "Good answer. Fix this before I rip it in half." He crouched beside the pump and began inspecting the internals, his fingers quickly finding the real problem. The intake line was clogged with sand, and the valves were misaligned. Clearly, whoever originally installed it hadn't known what they were doing, or maybe they just didn't care. It wasn't hard to believe. This place wasn't designed for comfort. It was a battleground, and everything beyond survival was an afterthought. As he worked, Nyla watched him, occasionally asking what he was doing but mostly observing in silence, her head tilted slightly as if trying to understand the way his mind worked. "You've done this before," she said finally. "Engineering was my thing before I got dumped into this dust bowl," he replied, twisting a pipe clamp back into alignment. "I was part of a mining crew. We laid down terraforming equipment, kept atmospheric regulators stable. You know, less blood, more wires. And now you're a mechanic in a pit of killers." "I didn't exactly choose this," he muttered. "My transport was raided. I ended up in debt. Now I fix things until I work it off or die trying." Nyla's brow furrowed. "They put collars on you." "No paperwork, which might be worse, honestly." She gave a thoughtful grunt, her gaze narrowing. "You fix things, but you don't belong here, not really." He looked up at her, squinting against the rising steam from the pump. "You do." I didn't nod at first. Her tone dropped lower, more guarded. "I came here because there was nowhere else to go. My pack cast me out when I refused to fight for the Alpha's mate, said I was disloyal, said I didn't understand our ways, so I came here and became something worse. A champion, a monster, a beast with a name." Oliver didn't speak right away. He let the silence stretch just enough before replying. "You don't seem like a monster to me." Nyla snorted. "You haven't seen what I look like in the middle of a kill." "Maybe," he said quietly, "but I've seen what you look like when you're listening. That counts more." For a moment she didn't move. Then slowly she crouched beside him close enough that he could feel the heat radiating off her body, smell the faint burn of war paint and sun-baked fur. Her voice was low, steady. "You're not afraid of me. That's not normal." "I'm afraid of a lot of things," he admitted. "But not you. I think you fight because you have to, not because you enjoy it." She tilted her head again, studying him like he was some kind of puzzle. "You keep saying things no one says. Things that make my chest feel tight. That's annoying." Oliver smiled faintly, returning his attention to the final clamp on the intake valve. "Good. Maybe I'll keep saying them." The pump sputtered, choked once, then began to hum with life as filtered water began circulating through the attached pipework. Nyla blinked in surprise as cool mist rose into the air. She dipped a clawed hand beneath the outflow, letting it run through her fingers. "You did it," she said, voice tinged with disbelief. "I've had 3 texts try and fail, one even electrocuted himself." "They didn't take the time to learn how it was put together," Oliver said, standing and brushing his hands off on his pants. "You can't fix something if you don't respect how it works." Nyla stood, towering over him again. "That goes for people too." "I know." She stepped closer, close enough that he had to tilt his head back to meet her gaze. Her eyes weren't burning now. They were smoldering softer, but no less intense. "You're not what I expected, Oliver. You're soft, but you're sharp too, like a blade hidden in fabric. And you're not just a fighter," he replied. "You're someone who's learned how to survive without losing your soul. That's harder." The tension between them simmered, not hostile, but crackling with something unsaid. Nyla reached out and placed one massive clawed hand on his shoulder. "You fixed something important today," she said, her voice low. "And I'm not just talking about the water." Oliver swallowed, his throat dry despite the cool mist in the air. "Glad I could help." She stepped back then, the moment breaking like a wave. "Come on," she said. "You're not done earning your keep. I've got a busted defense turret that's been spitting sparks for 2 weeks. If you can fix that, I'll stop calling you Little Fire." "Don't," he said, following her toward the exit. "I'm starting to like it." Nyla glanced over her shoulder with a look that could only be called amused pride. And as they disappeared into the maze of corridors and sand-scoured halls, Oliver realized something important. This wasn't just survival anymore. This was becoming something that felt dangerously like a beginning. The turret was mounted on the outer ridge of the arena's rear perimeter, a rusted, half-functioning relic from a long-forgotten war. Oliver stood on the scaffold platform next to it, the dry wind whipping his clothes as he leaned into the exposed panel and adjusted the polarity coils. Nyla watched from below, arms crossed, tail twitching slightly. She had let him hear without a word, her presence alert, scanning the horizon like she expected trouble to find them. She hadn't said why the turret mattered so much, only that it was the last line of defense in case things turned sour. That had been enough to make Oliver work faster. As he tightened the last of the conduit rings, he spoke without looking down. "This thing's wired to blow if the power feed gets overloaded again. Whoever rigged it last didn't know what they were doing. Most of the people here only know how to break things." Nyla called back. "You're the first person I've met who sees value in what's broken." He glanced over the edge and smiled faintly. "That's because most broken things aren't beyond saving. They're just waiting for someone to care." Her ears flicked toward him. She didn't respond right away. Instead, she climbed the side of the structure with that effortless, fluid strength that reminded him she wasn't just built for war. She moved like a creature bred by it. She hoisted herself up beside him, crouching low so they were nearly eye level. For a moment, neither spoke. The wind howled across the desert, carrying the distant sound of chanting from the arena crowds. But here it felt separate, quiet, insulated, like a place removed from the chaos. "I never cared about this turret before," Nyla said, her voice low. "It belonged to someone else, one of the old champions. When she died, they left her weapons to rot, like her. But now that you're here, I think about defense differently." Oliver raised an eyebrow. "You think I need protecting?" "I think I do," she said quietly, "and that's a problem." He blinked, taken aback. It wasn't fear in her tone, it was frustration. Like the admission itself tasted wrong. He sat back against the turret casing and waited. She continued, her gaze never leaving the horizon. "I fought alone for years, never needed anyone. Pack cast me out, Arena took me in. The audience gave me cheers, blood gave me purpose. But purpose fades, cheers die you. You looked at me like I wasn't a monster. And now I don't want to lose that, that makes me weak." "No," Oliver said, voice steady. "That makes you strong enough to care again." Her head snapped toward him, he didn't flinch. He held her gaze, speaking the truth plainly with no dramatics. "You could have kept fighting, winning matches, scaring everyone into silence. But instead you brought me here. You let me into your space. You shared food. You asked for help instead of taking it by force. That's not weakness. That's growth." Nyla's expression shifted, wounded, wary, then slowly uncertain. She looked away, jaw clenched. "I don't know how to be soft." "You don't have to be," he said. "You just have to stop believing you're only good for war." She growled low in her throat, not at him, but at herself. "Then what am I good for?" Oliver stood and brushed off his hands. "You're good at being honest. You're good at surviving. You're good at making someone feel safe in a world where nothing is. That's not nothing." Before she could answer, the sound of a horn split the air, sharp and angry. Neela stiffened instantly, eyes narrowing. From the direction of the arena came shouting, followed by the unmistakable sound of fighting. She snarled and leapt off the turret, landing in a crouch before straightening to full height. "What's happening?" Oliver asked, climbing down after her. "Someone staging a match that wasn't sanctioned," she growled. "Blood without rules. That means someone trying to make a move." She didn't explain further. She took off down the slope toward the arena with Oliver at her heels, his boots slipping on loose rock as he chased her through winding corridors and stone-cut tunnels. By the time they reached the edge of the main pit, chaos had already erupted. Fighters were on the sand, clashing outside the scheduled rotation. Guards lay unconscious or worse, and one of the lesser champions, Goran, a brute from the eastern sectors, was laughing as he battered an unarmed combatant. "This wasn't planned," Oliver said, panting as he caught up beside her. "What the hell is this?" "It's a power grab," Nyla said, teeth bared. "Goran's trying to break the rules, take the arena by force. If no one stops him, the audience will follow. Fear makes people stupid." Without warning, she strode forward. No speech, no warning. She walked straight into the ring, stepped between Goran and his victim, and shoved the larger warrior back so hard he skidded through the sand. The crowd went silent. Oliver watched from the edge, heart pounding. This wasn't a fight for entertainment. It was about control, about signaling to the arena that Neela wasn't just the best because she was brutal. She was the best because no one challenged her and walked away proud. Goran snarled something obscene and swung his hammer. Neela ducked and countered in a blur of motion. The fight was fast and vicious, less a match than a statement. Oliver had seen her fight before, but this was different. This was precision layered over fury. She didn't aim to kill, she aimed to embarrass. In less than a minute, Goran lay face down in the dust, groaning. Neela planted her foot on his back and raised her fist to the sky. "Rules matter!" she roared to the stunned crowd, "or everything dies!" They cheered, confused at first, then louder. The guards began moving again, reclaiming order, and the other fighters backed down. Oliver approached cautiously as Neela stepped off Goran and shook out her claws, blood dripping from her palm. Her breathing was heavy, but her eyes were focused. "You could have killed him," he said. "I wanted to," she admitted, "but I'm trying to be better." Oliver stepped closer and offered a cloth for her hand. She took it, their fingers brushing. "You were right," she murmured. "I fight because I have to, but maybe now I have something to fight for." He didn't answer. He didn't need to. The look they shared said everything. And as the suns began to set beyond the arena walls, casting the blood-stained sand in a golden glow, Oliver realized that this woman, this beast of claws and honor, wasn't just dragging him into her world anymore, she was letting him shape it. The night after the unsanctioned brawl carried a tension that settled into the walls of the arena like smoke. The sand had been cleaned, the bodies removed, but the blood still felt fresh in the air, and everyone knew it. The illusion of control had cracked, and the only thing holding it together was the fear of Neela's wrath. Oliver sat beside the central fire in her den, rolling a half-burnt capacitor between his fingers as he stared at the flames. He couldn't sleep. He had seen her fight before, but this was the first time it felt personal, like she wasn't fighting for sport or pride, but for something that truly mattered to her. The restraint she'd shown was more terrifying than any of her savage victories. She could have ended Goran. She wanted to, but she held back because she was trying to prove something to them and maybe to herself. Neela hadn't returned yet. After the fight, she had disappeared into the administrative levels of the arena, likely dragged into backroom discussions with the organizers and sponsors who saw her as both a champion and a threat. No one dared interfere with her when she was angry, but that didn't mean they trusted her to keep the peace. She was too powerful, too unpredictable, a weapon they couldn't control. And now that she had something to lose, something as simple and fragile as a bond with a human, they'd see her as compromised. That thought chilled Oliver more than the desert wind sneaking in through the stone vents. When she finally returned, her silhouette was carved in shadows, her armor scraped, one fang chipped, her eyes harder than usual. She didn't speak. She walked past him, dropped a bundle of data slates onto the stone beside her weapons rack, and began unstrapping her gear in silence. Oliver waited, letting the silence settle. He'd learned by now not to push when she was like this. She was gathering herself, dragging her mind away from the battlefield and back into the den. "They want me to throw the next match," she said finally, her voice quiet but edged with steel. Oliver turned toward her confused. "What?" She leaned back against the wall, arms crossed, the flickering light casting harsh shadows over her features. "They say if I keep dominating the ring, I'll destabilize the market. Sponsors are pulling out because the other fighters can't draw a crowd when I'm in rotation. They want me to lose to make things more entertaining." He frowned, slowly setting down the capacitor. "That's insane. You're the only reason this place still holds any authority. If you throw a fight, you lose everything that makes you different." "They don't care," she growled. "They only care about the numbers, the illusion of risk. They say I've become too predictable. Because you win. Because I don't kill anymore." Oliver stood, his body tense. "Then don't give them what they want, refuse." She let out a hollow laugh. "They'll make me fight someone I trained, someone who trusts me, and if I refuse to kill them, they'll make it look like I'm losing control." He stepped closer, lowering his voice. "Then we play smarter. We don't let them back you into a corner. We turn the game against them." She tilted her head, one brow raising. "And how do you plan to do that, little fire?" He took a breath, the plan forming even as he spoke. "We sabotage the betting system quietly. If the odds shift too far in your favor, we crash the signal, scramble the data feeds, make it look like a system failure. That'll shake their confidence and buy us time. While they scramble to fix it, we use the delay to stage an accidental blackout during the fight. You win fast, but no one sees it. No proof, no controversy, just confusion." She stared at him, visibly surprised. "You've thought about this?" "I've worked with people who liked leverage more than truth," he said. "Besides, I don't want them using you to sell blood. I want them afraid of what happens when they try." Neela stepped toward him slowly, and this time when she looked at him, it wasn't with guarded admiration or amusement. It was something deeper, like she was seeing him as an equal, not just a clever tool or amusing companion. "Why do you care so much?" "Because you're not a monster," he said, without hesitation. "And because I want to prove that someone like you can be more than what they built you to be." Her eyes burned as she studied him, then her hand reached up slowly, claws gentle, brushing the edge of his jaw. "You keep saying things like that," she murmured, "and I keep wanting to believe them." "Then believe them," he whispered. "No one else gets to define you." Their lips were inches apart, the fire crackled between them, and then, in one quiet, instinctive motion, she leaned in and kissed him, rough, uncertain, but real. Her lips were warm and fierce, her hand cradling the back of his neck with surprising care. He responded without thinking, heart pounding, every wall between them crumbling under the weight of something undeniable. When they pulled apart, her forehead rested lightly against his. "If I die in the ring tomorrow," she whispered, "I want you to know I didn't regret this, not 1 second." "You're not dying," he said, gripping her wrist, "not while I still have hands to fight for you." She laughed then, soft and low and almost broken. "Then we better start planning." They worked through the night, poring over the arena's old schematics, identifying access points to the data feeds and the backup power relays. Oliver used Nyla's knowledge of the layout and his own skills with tech to sketch out a sabotage plan that wouldn't be traceable. It wasn't perfect. It was dangerous, reckless, maybe even stupid, but it was theirs. And for the first time since arriving on this world, Oliver felt like he had a purpose again. Not just to survive, but to protect someone worth fighting for. As dawn crept into the den, casting pale gold light across the sand-scoured walls, Nyla curled beside him, her head resting on his shoulder, one arm slung possessively across his chest. She didn't ask for promises. She didn't offer any either. But the quiet between them was filled with a mutual understanding. They were no longer just allies or captor and captive. They were something else entirely. Whatever came next, they would face it together, not as warrior and prize, but as equals bound by something stronger than fear. The arena was quiet in the early hours, the kind of quiet that felt unnatural. Normally by sunrise, the maintenance drones would be buzzing through the hallways, vendors barking orders, guards laughing crudely at shift changes. But this morning was still, the silence thick and waiting. Oliver stood near the entrance to the lower service tunnels, pulse hammering in his ears as he finished wiring a bypass node into the arena's main relay feed. It was crude work, built from salvaged comparts in one of Nyla's fang-tipped armor studs, but it would do what it needed to, scramble the betting transmissions just long enough to disrupt the flow of data when her fight began. He triple-checked every connection, every capacitor, and every line of code. All it had to do was hold for 60 seconds. That was all the time she needed. When he straightened and wiped the sweat from his brow, a quiet voice behind him made him jump. "You're nervous," Nyla said, stepping into the narrow corridor. She wore only partial armor, her usual shoulder guard and the waist strap, but no chest plate. Her fur was brushed back, her war paint reapplied in deliberate streaks. She looked focused but not detached. There was a weight in her gaze, not fear but awareness. She knew what this day meant. He exhaled and nodded. "Of course I'm nervous. You're walking into a rigged fight where your best chance at surviving is trusting a sabotage job done by a sleep-deprived mechanic." She tilted her head slightly. "I trust you." He blinked, surprised by the calm in her voice. "Why?" "Because you could have run," she said. "You had chances, but you didn't. You stayed. You fight the only way you know how, with your hands and your brain. That means more to me than brute strength ever did." Oliver looked down at the panel, then back at her. "I hate this. I hate that you have to walk into that ring knowing they want you to lose, that they'd rather break you than see you free." "Then help me make sure they fail," she said. "Not just today, after." He stepped toward her slowly, resting a hand against her side just above her waist trap. "After. If we win today," she said, "we don't stay here. Not for another match, not for another crowd. We leave, you and me. I'm done letting others decide what I am." He stared at her for a long moment, searching her expression for any sign of doubt. "There was none. All right," he said softly. "Then let's make sure this works." The fight was scheduled just after the midday bell. The audience arrived in droves, crowding into the stands with an energy Oliver hadn't seen since the season's opening championship. Rumors had spread about a special match, an exhibition between Nyla and a new challenger from Offworld, some hybrid bred in the black pits of Varkon, a living experiment wrapped in artificial muscle and rage. It was a showpiece, nothing more than spectacle, but the undercurrent was clear. If Nyla fell today, the arena reclaimed its dominance. If she won, they'd lose control. He watched from the tech booth, seated beside the operator who monitored the broadcast feeds. The man barely noticed him, too busy adjusting camera angles and making idle commentary to the others. Oliver's fingers hovered near the portable trigger relay he'd embedded in the data stream. All he had to do was squeeze at the right moment. In the pit below, Nyla stepped into the ring to a storm of cheers and howls. She walked tall, chest bare, teeth bared in defiance, every muscle moving with controlled purpose. Across from her stood the challenger, massive reptilian covered in scale-plated armor and wired with bioelectric tethers. It was a monster in every sense of the word, designed to terrify not just defeat, but she didn't flinch. She never did. Oliver whispered to himself, "Come on, Nyla, give me a sign." She moved first, circling left, her claws dragging slightly through the sand. It wasn't part of her usual style. That was the cue. He pressed the relay switch. At once, the broadcast monitors in the control booth flickered, distorted, then dropped to static. The announcers scrambled, yelling into dead mics. Betting screens crashed. The feed was blind. Then in the ring, Nyla exploded into motion. She didn't circle anymore. She launched herself forward, a blur of rust-red fur and raw power colliding with the hybrid in a deafening crack of bone and metal. They fell together, rolling through the dirt, and the crowd screamed. Even without the cameras, the arena's chaos was real. Oliver watched the fight unfold from the edge of the control booth, heart in his throat. The hybrid rose, snarling, one arm torn from its socket. Nyla didn't give it a chance to recover. She leapt again, driving her knee into its throat and her claws into its chest, wrenching free a spray of circuitry and gore. The thing collapsed, twitching. The match was over in less than 20 seconds. No one saw it clearly, not in the confusion, not with the feed down. All they had was rumor, chaos, and confusion. But in the center of the arena, Nyla stood over the creature's broken body and raised her arms, not in triumph, but in warning. The crowd didn't cheer. They stared, quiet, watching her with a mix of awe and fear, and that silence was louder than any roar. Oliver met her eyes from the booth. She gave him the barest nod before turning and walking off the field without waiting for the officials to speak. By the time she reached the tunnel, the guards had already started talking, low, tense whispers about a day to crash, about suspicious timing. But no one stepped in her way. Not one dared. Later in the den, she tossed her bloodied shoulder armor onto the ground and pulled him into a tight, silent embrace. Her body trembled, not with fear, but with the weight of everything she had just refused to become. He held her without speaking, fingers stroking the fur between her shoulder blades. "I didn't enjoy it," she whispered. "I know," he said. "I think that's why I'm still me." He leaned in and kissed her again, deeper this time, with all the things they couldn't say with words. They didn't speak of what came next, not yet, but the decision had already been made. She had stood before the system that shaped her and said no, and tomorrow they would disappear from this place and never look back. Not as a champion in her prize, but as two people who had chosen one another in a world built to tear them apart. The morning air tasted of ash and tension. Word had spread too fast. The officials hadn't released footage of the fight, but that didn't stop the whispers. "Sabotage," they muttered. "Blackout time too perfectly." Neela didn't win. She cheated. The problem wasn't what had happened in the ring. It was that no one could prove it. And for people who thrived on controlling violence, not knowing meant fearing. Fear made them unpredictable. Oliver could feel it in the way the guards avoided eye contact as he walked the lower corridors, pretending not to see him, their grips tighter on their staves, their conversations clipped short. Neela was no longer just a champion, she was an unknown, and that made her dangerous in a way the arena couldn't sell. Oliver carried the small power module under one arm, wrapped in cloth, pretending it was just another repair order. He moved quickly, every footstep echoing too loud in his ears. The plan was simple. They'd leave tonight. The north platform rotated cargo through an older service shuttle that didn't get scanned, off the book supply runs paid in blood and bribes. One of Neela's old contacts had agreed to look the other way for a few seconds if compensated. Oliver had spent the night rigging an explosive delay into the auxiliary dock doors. Nothing lethal, just enough to stall pursuit if they were discovered. He hated this. He hated thinking like this. But after last night's fight, there was no pretending they were safe. He reached the den just after midday, the hallway unusually quiet. No arena noise, no crowd, as if the entire complex had taken a breath and didn't dare exhale. Neela sat in the corner, sharpening her clawed gauntlet slowly, methodically. Her war paint was gone. Her eyes tracked him the moment he stepped through the curtain, and she stood before he could speak, closing the distance between them with uncharacteristic stillness. "They know," she said, her voice low. Oliver swallowed. How much? Enough to suspect, enough to question why the feeds went dark at the exact moment I ended the fight. She stepped past him, her tail flicking with agitation. "They didn't call me in. They didn't threaten. They're waiting." "That's worse," he muttered. "Yes," she agreed, "packing now. It means they're planning something they think I won't see coming." He set the cloth bundle down on the stone slab that served as her table. The shuttle's scheduled to rotate dock in 6 hours. If we're there before then, we can slip aboard unnoticed. After that, I don't think we get a second chance." She stopped staring at him. "Are you sure?" "No," he admitted. "But staying here is suicide. You know that. You're too big a threat now. They'll either try to kill you in the ring or cage you in politics until they own your choices." She walked over to him, slow and heavy. "And you're still willing to follow me into nothing?" Oliver looked up at her, not blinking. "It's not nothing. It's you." For a long moment she didn't move. Then she leaned down and pressed her forehead to his, claws resting gently on his hips. "Then we go together." They spent the next hour stripping the den of anything, useful tools, spare batteries, rations. Neela insisted on leaving most of her trophies behind. "I earned them in blood," she said, "but they don't belong to who I am now." Oliver didn't argue. He understood. Letting go of the past was part of walking into something new, and as they packed, he noticed she kept one thing close. A single fang necklace, its chain tarnished and worn. She caught him glancing at it once but said nothing. When the sun dipped low enough to cast amber lines through the ventilation slits, they moved. Neela wore a long cloak over her armor, her shoulders hunched low to avoid attention. Oliver kept his head down, clutching a satchel of tools like he was still just another errand runner. The corridors were mostly empty, and the few they passed didn't raise an alarm, but the silence was too clean, too rehearsed. Something was off. They reached the secondary lift near the storage decks without trouble. The lift shuddered as it carried them downward, gears grinding with fatigue, the lights flickering once before stabilizing. Oliver tried not to think about the last time they'd ridden together in silence. Back then, she'd slung him over her shoulder like a prize. Now she walked beside him like a partner, her presence solid and warm at his side. When the lift opened to the docking corridor, the first sign of danger was the smell too sterile. No fuel, no rust, no grit, just recycled air, clean and cold. Then the second sign followed: no crew, no workers, no loaders or guards, just empty hallways and quiet machines. Oliver's stomach twisted. "They cleared it," he said softly. "They're expecting us." Neela bared her teeth. "Then we go through them." The first attack came fast. 3 guards from the left, stunned batons ready. Neela moved like a storm. She didn't hesitate. Her claws caught the first across the throat, spun the second into the wall, and knocked the third unconscious with a crushing elbow. Oliver didn't freeze this time. He yanked a flash charge from his bag and lobbed it down the far corridor. When it went off, more shouts followed, but they were disoriented. That was their chance. They bolted for the bay doors. Alarm started to wail, red lights bathing the hall in warning glow. Ahead, the supply shuttle was still there, ramp open, engines humming, but 2 more guards stood at the base, weapons drawn. "Mine," Nyla growled. Before Oliver could stop her, she charged. The guards fired once, twice, but missed. She crashed into them like a meteor, tearing one's weapon free and crushing it underfoot. The second tried to run. She tackled him mid-sprint and didn't let go until he stopped struggling. When she rose, breathing hard, her eyes found Oliver again. He was already at the ramp, hands flying over the control panel. 10 seconds, he shouted. "That's all I need." She covered his back as he worked, the shuttle rumbling beneath them. More footsteps echoed down the hall's reinforcements, too many. He didn't think. He slammed the emergency override. The ramp lifted, the outer doors hissed shut, and the shuttle launched with a jolt that threw them both backward. They hit the deck together, limbs tangled, breath ragged. For a while, neither spoke. The stars wheeled past the viewport, and the arena became a shrinking shape behind them. When Oliver finally caught his breath, he looked over at her. Her fur was stained with dust and blood, but her eyes, they were calm. "You all right?" he asked. She nodded, slow and deliberate. "I'm free." They sat in silence as the stars carried them toward whatever came next, not knowing where they'd land, not knowing who might follow, but knowing that for the first time in either of their lives, they weren't surviving for someone else's amusement. They were living together by choice, and nothing would ever own them again. The stars outside the viewport shimmered like distant fireflies, scattered across the black sea of open space. The The stolen shuttle cruised along its automated course, running dark with its ID transponder disabled and its signal mast beneath a pile of code Oliver had hastily written during takeoff. The silence inside the cabin felt like a reward. No sirens, no screaming crowds, no distant threats lurking behind blood-stained walls. Just the low hum of a ship moving forward in the quiet rhythm of shared breathing. Oliver sat cross-legged near the pilot's console, fingers idly brushing over an open diagnostic screen, but his mind wasn't on the data. It was on Nyla, sitting on the bench across from him, staring at her claws like they belonged to someone else. She hadn't spoken much since they escaped. She hadn't needed to. There were things heavier than words, and the weight of what they'd done, what they'd walked away from, was one of them. The look in her eyes wasn't fear or regret. It was reflection, like she was holding up the version of herself she'd been and comparing it to who she might become now. Oliver didn't press her. He respected silence when it was earned. Eventually, Nyla lifted her gaze, those familiar burning orange eyes locking onto him. "Do you think they'll follow?" He took a breath, exhaled slowly. "If they do, they'll be slow about it. They won't want to admit they lost control. You were their symbol. Admitting you broke free tells everyone else they can too. That's the kind of truth they try to bury." She grunted, half amused, so they'll let the story fade. "If we're lucky," he said, "and if we're not, we'll see them coming." She nodded, leaning back, her frame tense beneath the patch cloak still clinging to her shoulders. She didn't look tired, but she looked strained, like someone braced for a fight even when there wasn't one. Oliver stood and crossed the small cabin, sitting beside her without a word. She didn't flinch when he touched her hand, just looked down at it like she was still trying to understand why it mattered so much now. "I thought I'd feel more triumphant," she murmured. "You do. I feel hollow, like I cut something out of myself and left it behind." He tilted his head toward her. "That's normal. It's grief." She blinked, genuinely confused. "But I didn't lose anything." "You lost a version of yourself," he said softly. "The one that survived on instinct and violence, the one they built in that arena. She helped you get here, but she doesn't belong in the next part. That's grief too." Nyla went quiet, her jaw tight, shoulders rising slightly as if she were fighting something deep inside. Then she spoke again, voice quieter. "I used to think that beast was all I had, that it was the only reason anyone respected me." "It wasn't," he said. "You earned that fear, sure, but you earned my respect when you saved that fighter from Goran, when you didn't kill him, when you stayed in control. That was the strongest I've ever seen you." She looked at him, and for the first time he saw something raw behind her usual intensity, a kind of softness that made her seem almost fragile. "Do you still see me the same way?" she asked, not like she was fishing for comfort, but like she genuinely wasn't sure. He didn't hesitate, didn't. "Yes, but not just as a warrior. I see you as someone who clawed her way out of the life they chained you to, and someone who still made room for me when you didn't have to." A slow breath left her lungs. "You make me feel like there's more." "There is." He reached up and brushed a bit of dust from her cheek, his fingers lingering against her fur. She closed her eyes, leaned into the touch just slightly. "What happens now?" she whispered. "We find a place, a quiet one, a place where no one's chanting your name or betting on your survival." She opened her eyes again. "Do you know a place like that?" "Not yet," he admitted, "but I'll keep looking until I do." A faint smile tugged at the corner of her lips, small but genuine. "You'd really stay with me even now. I never planned to leave." Her hand moved then, slow and sure, resting over his chest. "When I first picked you up from the crowd, I thought you'd be a distraction, maybe a comfort, something to remind me I could still choose. I didn't expect you to become the reason." Oliver swallowed, his voice low. "And I didn't expect to fall for someone who could crush me with one arm, but I did. Somewhere between the grease stains and the way you stare down death without blinking, you made me want something again." She leaned forward and kissed him, gentler than before, but deeper. Less fire, more heat. Not rushed, not desperate, just real. When they pulled apart, the silence felt fuller, like something had been said without needing to be spoken. They sat like that for a long time, bodies closed, heads leaned together, the stars stretching endlessly beyond the viewport. The past was behind them, burning, broken, unrecoverable. Ahead was uncertainty, but between them was something solid, something earned. Eventually, Neela murmured, "When we find that place, I want to build something." "With what?" She smiled again. "With my hands, with your brain, with whatever scraps we find." Oliver chuckled. "That's the most romantic construction plan I've ever heard." "It's a start." And in that tiny cabin drifting through the dark, far from the fire pits and cheers and violence of the life they'd escaped, they began to dream of something new. A den that wasn't built of stone and blood. A life that wasn't earned through pain. A future that wasn't defined by survival, but by choice. Whatever came next, they would build it side by side. The stars eventually gave way to the glow of a nearby system, a pale gold sun, illuminating a series of moons and fractured satellites, orbiting a green-brown planet dotted with old wreckage fields and minimal atmospheric interference. Oliver studied the readout on the shuttle's navigational array, fingers flicking over the display with more confidence now, the kind that came from knowing his choices mattered, not just for him, but for the woman resting in the back of the cabin, stretched out on the padded floor with her arm draped lazily over her eyes. She hadn't slept well the past 2 cycles. Neither of them had, truthfully. Freedom didn't come with rest. It came with new anxieties. How far to fly, who might be watching, and whether they were already a few steps behind someone's crosshairs. But here, in this quiet zone of space, they'd found a temporary lull. Nyla stirred as the shuttle began its descent, her fur ruffling from the cabin's soft pressure shift. She rose slowly, stretching until her joints popped, her silhouette strong and tall in the dim glow of the ship's low-power lighting. "We're stopping." Oliver nodded. "Signal pings say there's an old mining colony on the 3rd moon, long abandoned, but the surface scans show partial structures still standing. No power grid, no life signs, could be salvageable for shelter. Maybe more." She approached and peered at the console, squinting slightly. How long since it was occupied? 17 years. Last log said the corporation that owned it pulled out after the ore dried up. Place was left to rot. Nyla folded her arms. "Rot is fine, long as it's quiet." The shuttle broke atmosphere, its engines rattling as it descended through the thin clouds, buffeted lightly by erratic winds. Below them stretched a barren landscape of jagged rock and scattered metallic structures, half-buried storage silos, landing pads overgrown with lunar moss, and skeletal frames of what were once worker dormitories. Oliver guided the ship toward the most stable-looking area and touched down with a practiced calm, the landing legs hissing into place. When the doors opened, the wind greeted them first, dry, low, whispering across the dust with a voice like memory. Nyla stepped out first, squinting against the hazy sun, her boots crunching softly over broken gravel. She didn't speak for a long time, just looked. Her posture guarded but not tense. Then she turned to him and gave a single, satisfied nod. This could work. They spent the rest of the day exploring the site. The colony was larger than the scan suggested, a network of reinforced tunnels beneath the surface, many of them intact. There were food dispensers, long dead and broken furniture littering the dormitories. The medbay had been stripped clean years ago, but the power conduits were salvageable, and the main reactor, though cold, looked like it could be coaxed back into life with some care. Oliver rolled up his sleeves, his mind already organizing tasks. "If I rewire the junction in the generator room and bring power back to the filtration system, we can get clean air moving. Temperature regulations shot, but we'll survive." Nyla ran a hand along the wall, eyes narrowed. This place was built to last. Hard angles, deep roots, not pretty but sturdy. He smiled, kind of like someone I know. She arched an eyebrow, then chuckled. "Flatter me again." and I might make you build this whole thing alone. You'd miss me by day 2, he said, already kneeling by the nearest access panel. They fell into a rhythm. Nyla cleared debris and secured the perimeter, dragging heavy frames and broken machines into piles for scrap. Oliver focused on the wiring and systems, coaxing power from old batteries and sealing off damaged bulkheads. They didn't talk constantly. They didn't need to. Every glance and every shared moment filled with quiet determination reminded them why they were here, why they chose this. Later that evening, they sat by the remains of an old fire pit, having built their own small blaze with dried fuel cells and scavenged heating coils. Nyla leaned back against a rusted support beam, her armor half off, claws flexing lazily in the warmth. Oliver handed her a ration bar, one of the last edible ones from the shuttle. "This place isn't much yet," he said, chewing thoughtfully, "but it's something." She looked at him, her eyes reflecting the flickering orange of the flames. "It's the first place I've been that wasn't given to me through blood or conquest." He nodded. "Same." A long silence passed before she asked, "Do you ever think about what you lost?" Oliver didn't answer immediately. He stared into the fire, watching the heat shimmer. "Sometimes I think about the crew I worked with, the places we traveled, but most of all I think about the version of me that just wanted to fix things and go home. That guy gone. And the one that's here now." He glanced at her, then smiled. "He's still fixing things, just building something that matters now." She didn't speak for a while, then she rose, crossed the space between them and sat beside him, not close touching. "I was never meant to build anything," she murmured. "I was made to break, to conquer, but here I want to try." He looked at her, really looked, and saw more than the warrior. He saw the firelight on her fur, the small scars on her collarbone, the way her shoulders relaxed when she wasn't watched. "Then we build," he said, "together." Her clawed fingers reached for his hand, curling gently around it. "You're not my prize anymore, Oliver. You're my partner." He squeezed her hand softly. "You've always been more than a fighter to me." The wind outside shifted, whispering through the broken metal of the compound. But inside, in the soft glow of the fire, surrounded by forgotten walls and quiet resolve, they felt steady, rooted. A life neither of them had planned, but one they'd built with their own hands. Tomorrow they'd fortify the doors, patch the roof, maybe rewire a few solar panels and get the water filter running. It would take time, it would be hard, but it would be theirs. And for the first time in a long, long while, that was enough. The moon colony had no name, no official record left in any starport logs or corporate archive, just coordinates and wreckage, a forgotten patch of dust orbiting a forgotten planet. But to Oliver and Nyla, it became a home, not overnight and not easily. They spent the next several weeks tearing into the broken heart of the place, coaxing light from frayed wires and warmth from rusted cores. The air system sputtered at first, but Oliver rerouted power through a makeshift regulator pulled from the shuttle's life support grid. Nyla, with her strength and tireless precision, cleared collapsed tunnels and secured the perimeter with crude but effective traps made from scavenged arena tech. Every day was work, real grueling work, and every night ended with them resting side by side, their bodies aching and their minds slowly, quietly beginning to believe in the shape of peace. They didn't talk much about the arena, not anymore. What was there to say? That place had built her and tried to break her. It had tried to use him too, just in quieter ways, but it failed, and the story it tried to write for them ended in dust. What remained was a better story when they wrote themselves. Nyla no longer wore her war paint. She didn't need it. Her scars spoke loud enough, and in Oliver's eyes they weren't symbols of battle anymore. They were the proof of who she chose to be afterward. He stopped thinking of himself as a technician from a lost ship. Now he was something else, a builder, a partner, someone she trusted enough to stand beside. It wasn't perfect. There were days the wind howled too loud and made them both sleep with one eye open. Days when the quiet felt too deep, the silence inside them echoing fears they hadn't spoken aloud, but they had each other. That steadied them more than any weapon ever had. They built a fire pit into the center of the old mess hall, turned a collapsed storage bay into a living space, and even got an irrigation system working with a tank they found beneath the old water plant. By the end of the second month, the compound had a name etched into one of the steel walls in Oliver's crooked handwriting. Denfire. Nyla grinned when she saw it, shook her head, then added a claw mark beneath it as her silent signature. As the seasons shifted, so did they. Nyla grew more open, more thoughtful. She laughed more, the real kind, not the short, sharp snorts that used to accompany her threats. She started to ask questions about Earth, not because she wanted to go, but because she wanted to understand what had made Oliver, just as he had once tried to understand her. He told her about rain and street food, and the way humans got irrationally angry in traffic. She listened, fascinated, amused, sometimes quietly wistful. In return, she shared pieces of her own past, the scent of the forest she was born in, the rituals her pack once celebrated before they turned on her, the first time she won a fight without blood. These conversations didn't always happen face to face. Sometimes they came during work or before sleep or while sharing a meal, but slowly they became part of their days, shared truths, threads in the life they were stitching together. Then one night under a deep violet sky with both moons visible through the shattered ceiling above their quarters, Oliver turned to her. They lay side by side, half covered by furs, a quiet hum of an old heater cycling in the background. She was staring at the stars, but her body was relaxed, her breathing steady. He reached for her hand, laced his fingers between her claws and held it. "I love you," he said. She didn't react right away, just squeezed his hand gently and turned to face him. Her expression was unreadable for a moment, like she was still figuring out what the words meant when spoken so simply, so clearly. Then she leaned in, pressed her forehead to his and whispered, "Then I'm finally something worth loving." He smiled, his voice a whisper. "You always were." They kissed not out of impulse or passion, but out of something steadier, a confirmation, a truth spoken in the quiet between breath and heartbeat, and when they pulled apart, neither said anything more. They didn't need to. The feeling lingered between them, real and complete. Weeks passed. They planted a greenhouse crude but functional, using solar filament sheets and nutrient paste compressed into soil. The first sprouts made Nyla laugh so hard she cried, which startled Oliver more than the time she'd broken a wall by accident. They built furniture from scrap metal and old carbon plating, reinforced the main roof with layered ceramic panels, and even managed to repair the colony's calm relay, not to send messages but to track signals. They wanted to know if someone came looking, but no one did. One evening, as a storm howled across the horizon, Nyla sat beside the fire, sharpening a blade she hadn't used in months. Oliver walked in, dust on his jacket, carrying a box of parts for a project he hadn't finished. She looked up at him, her smile slow and warm. "Still with me?" she asked. "Always," he said, setting the box down. She nodded. "Then let's finish this room tomorrow. I want a place to hang the lights you made." He crossed the space, kissed her forehead and sat beside her. The fire crackled, the storm raged outside, and inside, wrapped in warmth and the safety they built together, there was peace. They didn't need a ceremony, they didn't need a speech or a title or a witness. What they had was better, a bond forged in fire, tempered in survival and shaped by choice. And in that quiet corner of the galaxy, where no one watched and no one cheered, a gladiator and a mechanic built a life with their hands, their hearts, and the unshakable truth that love, real love, didn't need to be perfect. It only needed to be chosen, and they chose each other every day, always.